Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Sean Hession. I am a committee member on the Committee for the Institute on National Affairs at Iowa State University. And first of all, I would like to welcome and thank all of you for coming to this evening's installment of the Institute on National Affairs. As I'm sure many of you are aware by now, the theme for this year's Institute is America's Spirit, Dream, Myth, and Reality. And the theme for this Thursday of the Institute on National Affairs is Arts and Culture as it relates to the American spirit. Before we go any further, I would like to make a few announcements about tomorrow's program, the concluding day of the Institute on National Affairs. At noon in the Gallery of the Memorial Union, there will be a film presented, The Stevens of Iowa. At 3 p.m., Reuben Hill will be addressing the topic of Is the American Family as We Know It an Endangered Species, also being held in the Gallery of the Memorial Union. And tomorrow evening at 8 p.m. in Curtis Auditorium, the Dudley Riggs Brave New Workshop will be presenting their performance. This Minneapolis-based improvisational group does a wide variety of satire on economics, politics, society in general. However, now to the important part of this evening's presentation. Tonight we are very honored to have with us the former president of our sister institution in Iowa City, the University of Iowa, Dr. Willard Boyd. He is now the president of the Field Museum of Natural History in Chicago, Illinois, and if this wasn't enough to keep him busy, he is also a member of the advisory board of the Metropolitan Opera in New York City and the National Council on the Arts, which is an advisory council to the National Endowment for the Arts. So without any further ado, please join me in giving a very warm welcome to Dr. Willard Boyd.
I appreciate so many of you coming out because so many of you have heard me so often. I've always said that there's only one place I would have rather have been than Iowa City, and that's Ames, but you didn't ask me, so I had to go to Chicago. I am afraid I am going to say something traitorous tonight, and that is that we in the cultural institutions are even worse off than you in education at this point, but I hope you'll bear with me. I want to talk about human creativity, our never-ending frontier. The old American dream is fading. A new one must emerge. The United States now confronts a problem unprecedented in its national history, a scarcity of physical resources. In a time of declining physical resources, we must rely more heavily on human resources, our creative selves. Creativity must be fostered. No longer will an abundance of physical resources postpone pressing social and economic problems. There will be an increased demand for scientists and technicians to stretch our resources and develop substitutes. Their efforts will fall far short of a total solution, however, for means and ends, values and goals are also involved. In the future, the arts and humanities must be stressed as well as the sciences. Arms do not guarantee international security. Longer life and cleaner air do not assure happiness. Ideas and ideals, understanding and sensitivity give meaning to life. Because there are limits to material growth, we must concentrate on other means of development and fulfillment. We must use the time of our lives creatively. The next decade is expected to be a period of career difficulties for many in this country. If we are to flourish, we must multiply our personal interests. We must restructure our lives to encompass the satisfaction of volunteerism and leisure, as well as paid work. If this is so, we will come to value the whole of our lives. If a nation is willing to look at the whole of its potential, it can view the future with confidence. The arts and humanities are essential ingredients of our future creativity and fulfillment. Yet suspicion of the arts was historically ingrained in the American disposition. Our Puritan forebears distrusted song, dance, music, creative literature, and painting. They banished artistic creativity from their lives, calling art an enticement to frivolity, a distraction from serious stewardship of religious piety. It is peculiarly ironic that a people inheriting abundant natural wealth should have sought to deprive themselves culturally, and further, that they should have prided themselves on that deprivation. Of greater irony is that the arts have always been prominent in the lives of Native Americans and also in the lives of ethnic peoples who followed our first European settlers. Song, dance, and cultural crafts were common to those inhabiting the North American continent in the 16th and 17th centuries, and they have been vital in the lives of Hispanics, blacks, and other groups who settled America in subsequent centuries. At long last, the arts are flourishing in the United States, and they are flourishing everywhere in the United States. Since 1965, the number of professional arts organizations has grown by almost 700%. The number of professional orchestras has increased from 58 to 145, and they are all professional. Professional opera companies from 31 to 109. Professional dance companies from 35 to 250, and professional theater companies from 40 to 500. As the number of artistic groups grew, so did audiences. In 1965, for example, about 1 million tickets were sold for dance performances, chiefly in New York City. Today, there are about 16 million ticket buyers for dance performances, and 90% of them live outside New York. Similarly, the audience for orchestras has risen from 10 to 23 million. Average annual attendance at museums of art has gone from 22 million to more than 43 million. Americans are coming to value the arts as they do education. Since human creativity constitutes a nation's greatest wealth, education must always address the needs of the gifted and the talented. That national wealth must be shared with all citizens through general education. Universal education must include the arts in order to nurture talent and to extend artistic appreciation to the general citizenry. The role of arts education in the United States is now embroiled in the argument about basic skills as well as fiscal priorities. The popular cry is for a return to basics in education. Our school curriculum, it is said, contains too many frills, too many luxuries of excessive cost and dubious educational value. Frequently, those who wield the budgetary or scholastic knife make their first cut in the arts. Is arts education of central or only peripheral value? Like most basic skills and fundamental education, very little is known about the arts. I tend to view the arts as a basic form of communication, comparable to, but different from, the words of language and the symbols of mathematics. The arts meet a basic human need, creative personal expression. In addition to their intrinsic value, the arts give insight into other aspects of life, helping people understand themselves and the world in which they live. It is recognized that quality education should include the development of skills, knowledge, concepts, values, and sensitivities with which to understand and engage the culture of a nation. The arts offer significant opportunities for this development. Learning must incorporate the arts as a central, significant, and integral component. Artistic and educational institutions must recognize and support this concept. The arts can greatly enrich our lives, and in so doing, they do have basic value. The arts in education should start early. Children in elementary school need opportunities to grow, to explore, and to develop by having as much of the world introduced to them as possible. This requires an extension of all the senses: hearing and uttering organized sounds, seeing colors, feeling textures, telling creative stories, and moving rhythmically through space. At the secondary level, schools need to emphasize a comprehensive approach to the arts, including the visual arts, music, dance, theater, literature, architecture, film, and photography. Jazz, the media, and new art forms and expression should not be denied an educational forum because teachers or materials are hard to procure from traditional sources. Teaching of the arts ought to be as inclusive as the teaching of the sciences and humanities. No one believes that the science offerings which exclude physics or biology are adequate in any sense. Similarly, the arts are comprised of many disciplines. Since World War II, studio arts have become increasingly recognized as important in higher education in the United States. They now join history, theory, and criticism, along with arts education in curricular offerings. Most American colleges and universities are currently reviewing their general graduation requirements. While much of this review reflects a back to basics and nostalgia for the common core of knowledge, the arts are still emerging as a required part of general study. Admission policies are also being modified to recognize artistic talent as a significant variable in college entrance requirements. These very admission criteria determine the course offerings in secondary schools, and they should be included in the arts in the prerequisites, grade point averages, aptitude tests, and other relevant considerations. Education should accent the transcultural character of artistic expression. The Anglo-European standard of artistic excellence has dominated too long. Other nations, other cultures have contributed to humankind's artistic heritage. As our world grows smaller, we must appreciate otherness within and without this country. Schools and colleges are obligated to provide an understanding of cultural diversity, not merely an indoctrination in a single artistic approach. Proust has written, "Only through art can we get outside ourselves and know another's view of the universe which is not the same as ours." Through education at all levels, we must renew our human resources by preparing professional artists and developing discerning audiences. Greater public access to the arts will enhance both citizen and artist. Education in the arts is the best way to ensure the building of appreciative audiences. Mere exposure to the arts does not create more discerning audiences. 3 recent American studies in the development of arts audiences indicate that education is indeed a vital factor. As we learn more about the arts, and as they become more accessible, they will enrich our lives. No longer will the arts be the province of the few. We must open our lives to the arts so that our lives can be opened by the arts. As we look to the year 2000, I certainly hope that most Iowa towns will be more readily identified by their public sculptures than by their water towers. More creativity, as I've said often, should be rewarded with creativity, and I've said this with a certain amount of controversy. We ought to reward excellence in sports with excellence in the arts. And Dan Gable agrees with me that as the prize for an athletic competition, a painting or a sculpture would be an enduring testimony to creative moments in sports. Shaping the humane world is indeed an art. The efforts of humanists may not be as visible as those of artists, but they are as crucial to our self-realization as individuals and as vital members of the community. Modern technology has contributed to group efficiency and also has helped to erode the ideal of individual fulfillment. While automation makes work a lot easier in one way, it diminishes consideration of human need. The omnipresent computer only accepts information converted into distinct units. Human values and goals are not subject to analysis through a limited set of tangible variables. To tend the machines and staff the bureaucracy, an ever-increasing number of highly skilled individuals with specialized knowledge are graduating from our colleges and universities. All too often, they come to identify completely with their skill and their job. Unfortunately, the need for such skills and specialties changes rapidly. Our perception of these shifts lags behind the changes themselves, resulting in surpluses of narrowly trained individuals. The victims of unemployment and underemployment doubt their own self-worth. There is fear of an overeducated, underemployed population which will become restive. This country is a product of individual and collective restlessness. It is hardly possible, and certainly not desirable, to thwart that spirit as we enter a future requiring human initiative. If we are well prepared, we are more likely to cope with a changing society and economy. There is a fundamental need to continue learning. Learning may take many forms, but its goals are few. It must improve our ability to perceive and understand the world. It must enhance the acuteness of judgment and exactness of word. It must stimulate and pique the creative parts of the brain, and it must fill the time of one's life with activity that will fulfill the human need to be useful and wanted. Developing human resources is the challenge facing liberal educators who want to shape a humane world. People must come to rely upon themselves, their own energy, resourcefulness, creativity, and intelligence. We must develop skilled professionals who have a strong sense of self-identity and human worth. The study of language can heighten our understanding of different human sensibilities. Besides the obvious advantage of improving communication among the people of the world, language study enriches the appreciation of other cultures and worldviews. The availability and choice of words and the grammatical structure of a language often reveal the way that people perceive the universe. Language study also stimulates the mind. The need to think in a new language encourages mental agility. It forces a review of one's own language, the subtleties in our grammar and syntax. We are understood by the subtleties of our expressions, which transmit our feelings and thoughts. And the other night in Chicago, I was told a story about a great Iowa State graduate, the distinguished Governor Loudon of Illinois, who, when he came to Iowa State, he lived with a farmer nearby who tutored him in Greek and Latin, and he had an inquiring mind the rest of his life. Not just in the arts and humanities, but in all areas of learning, colleges and universities must engender the quest for continued learning and comprehension. Through continuous reading, an individual can gain greater insight and understanding. In a time of electronic miracles, the book remains the greatest audiovisual invention of all times. Books can multiply the effect of skilled teachers many, many times. Despite these diverse ways to stimulate human development, the role of the educator is, in fact, limited. We can only assist in developing a humane world, since no educational program can guarantee either employment or individual fulfillment. The decision of how to use knowledge is up to each one of us. The teacher can only encourage constructive work and leisure, which is genuinely creative and recreative. The opportunity to grow continuously must be there, but we cannot force its use. The tension arising from the need to preserve individual integrity and pride in a world increasingly concerned with collective welfare and collective security has never been greater. The future of humankind depends on maintaining a balance between these conflicting forces. As always, collective welfare and collective security are taking fiscal precedence. Aside from organized religion, the American cultural enterprise relies more heavily on private contributions than other portions of the nonprofit sector of our society. This private funding for cultural groups is more fragile than is the private funding for other nonprofit areas, including higher education. It is also important to recognize that outside of a relatively small number in museums, most humanists are university and college faculty members. Unlike the arts, higher education is the principal home of the humanities. Among cultural, education, and health organizations, cultural institutions do rely most heavily on non-governmental support. This may be due to a basic American philosophy about the support of cultural institutions, or it may be due to a lower priority attached to them by the general citizenry. Most people attend governmentally supported schools, colleges, and universities such as Iowa State and Iowa. Moreover, private higher educational institutions receive a higher percentage of direct government support than do cultural institutions. For example, in 1981, nonprofit theaters received 4.5% of their support from the National Endowment for the Arts, while all private colleges and universities received 16.5% of their support directly from the federal government in 79-80. As centers of creativity, I think we in nonprofit theaters might better compare our 4.5% with the 22% of direct federal grants which went to private American research universities. All nonprofit organizations rely to some degree on earned income. This is especially true of performing arts organizations. According to a 1977 U.S. Census of Service Industries, admission receipts accounted for 66% of theater revenue, 34% of dance revenues, and 37% of symphony and opera revenues. In comparison, private colleges and universities relied upon tuitions and fees for 32% of their revenue in 79-80. Hospitals, of course, rely most heavily on charges and fees. Unlike members of the audience, patients and students can finance their fees, and so it is possible for hospitals and colleges to charge more. Scholarships and loans are available to needy students. Although now in grave jeopardy, extensive state and federal financial aid programs have facilitated student access to private colleges and universities, while lower tuition affords access to public higher education. Even though not accounted for as federal support, student financial aid has been the principal form of federal aid to higher education. In the case of hospitals, patient charges are insured. Third parties pay most of the costs. Paying patients pay only 10% of the bills, while commercial carriers pay 15%, Blue Cross 30%, Medicare, Medicaid 45% of hospital charges. Our domestic times may be changing materially. In the last 50 years, government at all levels put a floor under social services, higher education, and health care. The private sector continued to provide the cultural floor. As cultural institutions sought the private dollar for both survival and excellence, other nonprofit institutions sought the private dollar principally for that margin of excellence. In recent years, American governments have become partners in cultural funding. The arts and humanities endowments have always been intended as junior funding partners. Nevertheless, the current national administration sought, and happily unsuccessfully, to reduce that fiscal role beyond the general need to reduce all federal expenditures. Mr. Stockman asserted that the 50% reduction for the two endowments was due to the historic role of private support of cultural institutions. Arts Endowment Chairman Hodsall stated that it was due to the fact that since the two endowment appropriations grew more rapidly in recent years, they should now decline more rapidly. In his American Arts interview, Mr. Hodsall said, quote, "If you look at what NEA's role is in funding the arts, it's in the range of 6 to 10% of all unearned income that goes to them. So when you cut back even by half, you're only reducing by 3 to 5% the unearned income that is available. Add to that the White House's willingness to exercise quite a lot of leadership in raising money privately, and you should be able to make up that difference," end of quote. And so we need to look carefully at the unearned income which comes to cultural institutions from private sources. Although the fastest growing beneficiary of private philanthropy, culture still ranks next to last on the donor's totem pole. From a percentage standpoint, private gifts run as follows: 49% to religion, 15% to education and research, 14.5% to health services, 10.5% to human services, 6.7% to culture, and 4.5% to civic and social action. Now the question is, what will be the impact of federal cutbacks on the priorities for private giving? Given the present allocation of private giving, cultural institutions cannot assume that they will be able to advance or even maintain their share of private contributions. Much depends on the extent of the fiscal safety net which President Reagan speaks of providing for economic and social security programs. As Mr. Hodsell points out, a reduction in federal funding of the arts will have lesser consequences for the arts than for programs which have come to rely more heavily on federal funds. But there could be a domino effect on the arts if relatively more private funds are needed to keep previously governmentally funded programs alive. Health agencies may need more private funds now. The only major corporate community donor where I live now that expects to contribute more in 1982 intends to contribute that more to social services. The Reagan administration now recognizes that the gap being created by reduced federal expenditures and a slow economy will not be filled. True to his philosophy, President Reagan leaves it to the private donor to decide what portion of the gap will be filled. Accordingly, those of us in the cultural institutions must make the less popular case for private support in very uncertain times. At the present time, the sources of private giving by percentages are corporations 5%, foundations 5%, bequests 5%, individuals 85%. Corporate giving fluctuates. It depends on corporate profits. It depends on corporate purposes. Foundation giving will decline for a few years as a result of a change in the law which reduces required contributions. The resulting accumulation of principal may ultimately increase foundation giving somewhat in the future. Bequests have been declining. Now more than ever, we will depend on individuals. Now that I've left the university for a museum, oh, how much I miss the tuition-paying students and the loyal giving alumni. A college can build stronger ties with alumni in 4 years on campus than a museum can with its members at exhibit previews and open houses. No one knows whether the changes in tax deductions will increase individual giving by both small and large donors. The impact of the change for large donors was not missed by some lawyers and accountants, as 1980 year-end gifts came in with request for 2-year contribution credit. Private initiative in the nonprofit sector may need encouragement as it does in the profit sector. As tax laws have been designed to spur business activity in the private sector, it is reasonable to assume that there ought to be tax spurs provided for private initiative in the nonprofit sector. We must actively encourage more and more people to contribute. Their economic circumstances clearly will be of major consequence as to how much they contribute. Tax encouragement is the kind of federal help we need. Of course, we welcome federal cheerleading, but we certainly do not want the two endowments to go into the raising of private funds. Uncertainty and adversity must not immobilize us. We must work with corporations to increase their general philanthropy. We must not, however, be overconfident. Notwithstanding Harris Poll's support for the arts in education, corporations and foundations with elementary and secondary school focuses do not readily see how cultural programming relates to their objectives to reduce the dropout rate, help high achievers with disadvantaged backgrounds, or strengthen school-neighborhood relations. Clearly and properly, the burden of making the fiscal case for the arts and humanities rests on us. I agree with President Reagan that the arts can only flourish if the nation is secure. An unstable economy is the biggest threat to our national security. Therefore, I support his efforts to reduce federal expenditures. I also agree with his basic thesis of decentralization. I differ with him, however, in his assessment of the human condition and how the nation will be enriched in years to come. Spirit and commitment make the difference in football. Spirit and commitment also make the difference in nations. Our physical resources are declining. In the future, more than ever, people will be this nation's greatest natural resource. Our future depends on our ideas and ideals, our understanding and imagination. Our future depends on our creativity. In order to succeed with his fundamental objectives, the President has focused on the two issues of the economy and the federal role. President Reagan has not, however, conveyed a sense of national purpose, of pervasive national creativity. The administration does not give the impression that it thinks deeply about the consequences of its acts. Although I believe in national preparedness, I doubt Pentagon experts as much as I doubt experts in the arts and humanities. Complex weapons systems will not take the place of public commitment, as we saw in Vietnam. If we are to be a strong nation, we must be a strong people. The arts and humanities, along with the sciences, are the basic grist for a prosperous nation. Together, they form America's never-ending frontier. Thank you.